There's nothing else that could have done this. In several parts of the story, there were no other candidates for animals that could have done this, and how it is Clara gotten back there, and why were all the clothes taken off, and why was he stuck way up in this tree, and nothing makes sense. Since we talked last time, and I told you like a lot of the different accounts that we've been collecting over the years from Bigfoot encounters and sightings and events in our area, and there was I get reports all the time. People contact me and say this happened and that happened, but there's one of note that I wanted to convey to you that's really interesting. So Rod Taylor, he's a dear friend of ours. We've known him for years and years, and he is we got him elected as our county commissioner. So we have 3 county commissioners, and we know his wife as well, and Nicole. They bought a piece of land, acreage, undeveloped, and there's this area just 5 miles out of Bandon, not even that, Bear Creek. It's this little dead-end valley, and beautiful place. And on the east side of that, there's all these pieces of property. And that is actually, that area there is on the official Bureau of Land Management Bigfoot map, where they actually recognize they've had sightings in that area. It's actually marked on the map for all of southwest Oregon. So Rod and Nicole bought this acreage, and their dream is to build a home on it someday. And next door to them, there's Larry Cox, and the next door to him is Mike Harrington. Both of those are people who I have recorded their Bigfoot encounters on their property up there. Amazing direct encounters with very, very credible people. Rod and Nicole bought the acreage next to them. But they didn't know anything about that. I had spoken to them before because everyone knows that I'm like a Sasquatch guy. They had told us plainly, they humored us, but they said, it's just a legend that's good for business. Because all the stores in town will have Bigfoot merch and things like that. And so, okay, well, I'm not going to argue with you. So they bought this property. And then they were out there sitting on their property up in the woods this one fateful evening, and they started hearing them. There were 3 of them up on their acreage in the woods, way up high, yelling at each other with the same type of communication. They were, screaming, and then there was the uniquely primate gibberish, and then howling and roaring, but all these sounds were very easily recognized as nothing indigenous here, nothing none of the wildlife that goes there. It wasn't a cougar, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't Mike Harrington, when he first heard it, he thought somebody's tropical bird had escaped. He didn't know what in the world, and then he finally figured out that that Bigfoot is real. So Rod and Nicole are sitting there, and Nicole turns to Rod. This is what they conveyed me, and she said, Stan and Teresa were right. And Caesar said, they are real. So Nicole, she's as crazy as Teresa. She starts calling to them and making noises back at them, and she got them to respond. And Rod's going, don't do that. He's a little bit more conservative and rational. And so don't do that. And so they started really calling, and then it just, they knew these primates are up there and they're real, and Stan and Teresa were right. And anyway, so I just wanted to convey that's happened actually since the last interview. Shifting gears here, what I'm hoping to talk about is there's a famous actor. His name is Charles Levin. He was in, I think, 6 different sitcoms. He was a real famous character in sitcoms like Seinfeld and a number of different sitcoms like that. And he was also in 3 movies as an actor. And he retired and turned 70, and he decided he was living in Grants Pass at the time, Oregon, and he decided he wanted to move to a more rural location. near a little tiny town called Selma, which is just a short ways from Cave Junction, which is the most famous Bigfoot place. There's actually a huge store right in downtown Cave Junction. Anything pertaining to Bigfoot you want, they have it there. Movies, so he was moving, and he took he thought it was a back road. You know how people, there's this new thing called dying from GPS, and that's actually what happened. So he was taking this back road, and he got turned around. And there's the forest there, massive empty forests with like old logging roads and old logging trails going everywhere. And it's all pretty steep. And so he called and told somebody, look, I got turned around out here. I'm going to have to find my way back. That was the last that was heard from him. And then he disappeared. And so they were able to get some kind of a ping off of his phone, however they do that. And this one man, his name was, he was 36 years old, Jess Smith was his name. And he was a hunter, but he's also a rescue guy, search and rescue volunteer. And he got the word that there was this guy that was missing, and he lived near there. Said he was familiar with that region, so he thought, I'm going to try to find this guy. So that he went the back way and found his way in there, and he found his car, and he found him. I'm kind of skipping some details until later. He was dead, and when they finally discovered him, it had been 15 days since his last contact. So he'd been dead for a long time, and so. He contacted the police, and the police, they came in to the area. They just kind of followed the guidance and got in there. As they were in there on an ATV, and they got as far as they could up that road. It wasn't a road. It was completely overgrown. And there was like tree falls and logs and brush, and there was just impassable. They went as far as they could with their ATV. They actually damaged the police ATV trying to get to this guy. And Charles Levin had been driving an orange Fiat, not exactly an off-road vehicle. That's just an urban vehicle with little wheels, and that's what she was driving. And so they're like, where is he? So they abandoned their ATV and they went forward on foot. And they had to hike back in here over logs and with brush and fallen trees. And they worked their way back a quarter of a mile, which when you're hiking in the woods, I can tell you from long experience, a quarter of a mile is a long ways when you're hiking in trailless forest. So they hiked their way back in there, and they found his vehicle. And then they did extensive reports, detailed reports. And I've been collecting, there are several reports that have been written, and there were a lot of news articles that were written about this, because he was a famous actor. And this is so mysterious. And then what happened was, I'm just telling you this, I could speculate, but that's not going to be really useful. I just want to tell you the facts. And the reason I'm motivated to do this, because there's a lot of mystery and tragedy in our world. The reason is because the entire thing was completely covered up. And the official report was, it was a mysterious and unexplained accident. That's the official, that was what it was called, a mysterious and unexplained accident. And I have become aware of what actually happened. And if I were Charles Levin, I would want somebody to sound the alarm. Hey, no, this guy wasn't just some idiot that made a bunch of extremely bad decisions and went crazy. He was killed. And I'd actually think it'd be interesting to take all the forensic evidence and put Bigfoot on trial, you know. But that would be an interesting scenario. Anyway, so here's what happened. So the police had to hike in through this terrain and across all this debris, a quarter of a mile to get to his car. And the vehicle had been badly damaged. It had been smashed in, and basically the car had been beaten, and it had been scratched, and it was completely high centered on a bunch of vegetation, but it couldn't have driven there. There is no possible way. And the police actually said that the only thing they could figure was that he was driving along and he would come to a log. He had to move the logs. He had to lift the trees. He had to move the things aside to get his car through. And of course that has like zero plausibility, but that was what they actually put in their report. They said he had to move all this to get the car in there. And you think, oh, why was he doing it? Well, I allege that he didn't. That the vehicle couldn't have gotten in there. There's no physical way for the vehicle to get there. It was carried. It was carried by some really, really big, strong creatures that have the easy capacity for that. We know that very well from things that we've seen. Throwing trees, things like that. We've seen videos of Bigfoot just literally throwing trees. And so there it was, high-centered, and the door had been ripped open, the mirror had been broken off, it was beaten and scratched, and it was set it was just like basically lodged in these rocks and on top of this vegetation, high-centered. And his dog, Boo Bear, which is his name, it was a pug, and he had a blue collar. And when they found the dog, that's all that was left of him was that blue collar. That's how they identified it. And his remains were on the floor of the passenger seat. And the door had been ripped open. The car was wide open. There's no reason why the dog couldn't have gotten out of the car over those. It was 15 days later after the original this guy is missing to when they finally found the body. They were looking, trying to find him, and so in the back, the front seat had been jammed forward. Something had forced that seat forward, and his possessions were still quite intact in the car. His glasses had been broken and thrown on the ground. And then it gets worse. I'm just sorry to tell you this is really a sad story. So the car is on the edge of a ravine. Everything there is really steep. And so there's a slope going down the hill, like so many of the forests out there. And about 30 feet down the hill, there was a twin tree. And there's some species of tree, like Doug fir. It's very common. You'll have twins that will actually grow together like this. And then there'll be twins, but at the bottom they're together. And so when they found Charles Levin's body, all of his clothes had been removed, had been torn off of him, and they were in a pile on the ground. And his body was perched up in this where these two trees joined. It was perched, spread-eagled on its back, looking up. Completely naked, and it had been there for we're just guessing, 2 weeks, for quite a while, and the police, they had to get a pulley and rope to get a hold of his body and to get it up and out of there. There was nothing left except his body, and that was basically what the damage that had been done, and so they got him out of there, and they had to remove the car. It was so far back in there and so inaccessible, it took the police a month to remove his vehicle from there. They had to basically carve a way back there with by machine, with a vehicle that was capable of pulling the car out and getting it up there. So I understand the problem. If he had been killed by a cougar or a bear, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Nothing would be like, whatever. That happens all the time. There are so many people in Oregon forests every year that disappear. It's really not rare. It's quite common that people just disappear. And I think most of them is just exposure. And the police report said that Charles Levin died of exposure. That's silly. This was from June 28th to July 13th. That's like hot time in those forests. I spent months and months in the forests like that. It's quite warm. And the idea of dying exposure, you could die of thirst if you didn't know why there's any water, but you'd be quite comfy back there. Never mind the mosquitoes. So anyway, that was the report. They said died of exposure, and it was all a mysterious and unfortunate accident. And I'm just thinking, I feel bad because it wasn't an accident. It makes him look like an idiot. What was he doing? Why did he try to get his car back there? Why did he get perched up in those trees? Why did he take all of his clothes off? Well, okay, I'm alleging here, because I wanted to stick to the fact he didn't. This is what was done to him. But the problem is that there's no other animal to blame except Bigfoot. There's nothing else that could have done this. In several parts of the story, there were no other candidates for animals that could have done this, and how would his car have gotten back there, and why were all the clothes taken off, and why was he stuck way up in his tree, and nothing makes sense. But the problem is that there are people that would be appalled at the idea of saying Sasquatch killed Charles Levin. The reason is because that would be like, to them, making a mockery of his death, because it would just seem like some sort of a joke. Like, well, that's just a legend. Like, you're dismissing this guy. You're making a joke out of his death. And then the authorities, they would be horrified at the idea of it actually being an official report that he was evidently killed by Gigantopithecus, by a Sasquatch, because that's the line that they cannot cross. And that's just my notebook. I have this notebook where I keep everybody's reports in. I've got so many reports from people's sightings, and they just can't go there, because once there's an official declaration, the Bigfoot is recognized by the government. Stuart Levin explained this to me. He said that will pull the trigger from the Endangered Species Act, and we're in big trouble. We would have to lock up everything from Sacramento to Alaska. And also, he said his exact words, he said, they are too intelligent and elusive for us to count. He said, that's my job. Stuart Levin counts our wildlife, and he's really good at it. But he says, if they assign to me, he said, that would be my job. He said, I'd love to try, but he said, I know I would fail. So we have to keep it as a legend. It's actually, and I agree, that's good governance. And people in Van, they've told me, a number of merchants, the books Van, the legend is really good for business. But the fact would be terrible for our town, because we would have every yahoo coming here with guns trying to bag Bigfoot or doing something idiotic like that, and we'd have people dying out in the woods shooting each other. It would be crazy. So and I kind of agree with them. I see the paradox. There are people that want Bigfoot publicized and made official, but I know what would happen. It's the same way in the southeast United States with the ivory-billed woodpecker. There's plenty of them there, but they keep it listed as extinct because they don't want to lose those pine forests, and they would all get locked up. There are the police reports, but then there are also a number of newspaper articles that were written about this and published at that time because he was a famous actor. But they all came to the same conclusion. It's a tragic and mysterious accident. And that's because that's what the police told them. They interviewed the police. They looked at the police records. They interviewed the guy who found him originally, Jess Smith. And so there were a number of articles. And what I did was I got all the articles, and then I basically compiled them together to get the whole three-dimensional picture. There's there were the police reports, there was the witnesses, and then there was the newspaper articles from investigative journalists that said, what happened to this guy? And they investigated, and then they kept running into this wall. It's like you can't say that word. You can't even suggest it, because what happens is then, there's that theory, never believe a rumor until there's an official denial. Well, the thing is that they don't want to go to an official denial. Like the police don't want to be in a position saying, no, it wasn't Bigfoot. And the reason that's because then everyone and their dog is going to go, oh, that means it was. That's the way the human psyche works, and so the whole subject was just drop it. The evidence screams to me, because there's so many things there. The car wasn't just shifted; it was carried through brush and trees a quarter of a mile. And so it had to be something big and strong enough to be able to do that. And then the manner of death, there was no evidence of any. The only predators were just the vultures that found his dead body, and there's nothing else. It was just left there, and the car was so badly damaged that it's unexplainable by some accident. And how did the car even get on that pile of vegetation and debris and rocks? It just doesn't make any sense. You couldn't have driven it there. He couldn't have even gotten it close. There's no physical possible way. And so I just compiled it all and just kind of put it together into an account. And I just look at this one, Charles, I want people to know. No, you didn't die from stupidity, which is what it would be like, the impolite way of saying it. You were killed, but we can't publicize it, because then we're going to open a horrific can of worms, because we need to keep it as a legend. And it's just sad, and I can't fix that. But I just want people, and anybody interested to know, Charles Levin did not die from foolish decisions. He was, because we all know there's so many accounts in history and all over the place. There's so many people that run into Bigfoot, and then what happens? This happened to my kids, and where the Bigfoot will scream at them, or throw rocks at them. It's always either one or the other. Roar at them, throw rocks at them. I had friends that it happened to them. So here's Charles, the poor guy. His car is stuck in Bigfoot territory, and they're screaming at him, throwing rocks, whatever, and then he stays there. They go, okay, we got to go with plan B. And that's what they did. Now that's speculation. I sadly agree with the poets. Many of the people that I know that are into Bigfoot, they want to publicize it and make it all. I record people's sightings, and I've got a huge collection of them. I've got collections here that go back a lot in the early 1900s, late 1800s. I've got one that goes back 1,000 years. Leif Erikson had a terrifying encounter with Bigfoot in Canada. Anyway, so that was the prologue. That was what happened afterwards, and that's been about it. But the reason I'm impassioned is because if it was me, I'd want somebody to at least say, yeah, I didn't die of stupidity, or I wasn't crazy, or I didn't bonk my head and go crazy. I was just killed.